Thank you very much, Professor Iqbal, for this opportunity. So let's talk about perception. I think you know a lot about Pakistan, perceptions or misperceptions. Being IR students, I hope many of you are in international relations. So perceptions and misperceptions start with a mindset. And the current mindset on Pakistan is it's an epicenter of terrorism. That is what the West, we call it West in Pakistan. So being a Pakistani, I will also tell you about a Pakistani perception. So the Pakistani perception on the West is we have been used, misused, used, and again misused. So that was the Cold War. Pakistan, the bulwark against communism. Pakistan, the leader in making this jihadi culture. But the Western perception at that time was we want to make Afghanistan another Vietnam for the former USSR. So nothing was wrong at that time. Everything is welcome because at that time the holy war was against communism. So that thing destroyed the identity of Pakistan. And now the Pakistani perception against the West is never trust the Americans. They use you, they misuse you, they throw you out like a tissue paper. So that was what we were at the forefront of this American war against the communism way back in the 1980s and 90s. Then another thing, coming back to another misperception and perception thing. So that was a kind of an introduction, how things were being considered in Pakistan regarding the United States and how the US citizens or the United States policymaker, more importantly, see things on the Pakistani front. So now the question arises, is there a middle ground? And for average Pakistanis, every middle ground starts with the problem of Kashmir. It is into our bones. It has entered into our bones. So that means if you want to curb terrorism, solve this problem. This problem which we will be going to discuss today is the root cause of terrorist or the jihadist or whatever nomenclature you like, is the root cause of all the trouble in Pakistan. So let's see what this problem is all about. Before I delve into it, some brief facts on Kashmir is, it is the long-standing United Nations Security Council dispute. With the birth of the United Nations, Kashmir is born. So it is not a dispute between India or Pakistan. It is the problem which started with the origin of United Nations. So UN was born in 1945. This was the very first dispute which was discussed in the United Nations in 1947. And it is still lying there, asking for its resolution. So my topic, my issue was it to give it a different perspective, because I'm assuming that most of you have taken at least basics international relation courses, so you know about the theories of realism, neoliberal institutionalism, or social constructivism. Am I right on this? Yep. So you know this. So I will be discussing it in a different perspective. So we will first see what does the realist theory demands, and then we'll come to neoliberal institutionalism, and then finally to social constructivism, which is my base. But before that, let's see how this security dilemma of identity is developed in Kashmir. Now, the basic problem is on the imbroglio side, there are constructive narratives of Kashmir, which means it is a predominantly Muslim area. 80% of the people in Kashmir are Muslims. It is a mountainous area. It has its borders with half a dozen countries like China, Afghanistan, India, Pakistan. And demographically, 80% of its people are Muslims. Now, at the time of partition means the partition of the Indian subcontinent, the partition after which India and Pakistan are born. So this was done in 1947. There were some princely states. Princely states refer to those areas which were autonomous under the British rule. There are many princely states. There are 562 princely states. 562. And these states are all autonomous. Autonomous means they have their own ruler, they have their own government. It is only the Britishers who provide the security, the communication, and the foreign policy, that's it. All other areas are under state control. And Kashmir is the largest princely state in India. Thank you. So we are now talking about 1947. And the significance of 1947 is the partition of India and Pakistan. And at that time, there were princely states. Princely states means their ruler was a prince, a Maharaja, a king. They were all autonomous under the British rule. They were only provided security, communication, and foreign policy by the Britishers. And out of 562, Kashmir is the largest. It has an area of 80,000 square miles, and over 80% of its people are Muslims. Now comes the partition plan. The partition plan is Britishers wanted to leave. They were being resoundingly defeated after the Second World War economy-wise. Their economy in England, in Britain is in the shambles. They want to have quick fix solutions. And they gave 3 options. 3 options were given to every princely state. These 3 options are, number 1, either they join India, or they join Pakistan, or they remain independent. Now, the third option, remain independent, is a bit perplexing one. Why? Because if a state wants to become independent, it really has to be on a tightrope as far as its foreign policy is concerned. Because we have 2 hostile neighbors, India and Pakistan, fighting against each other. And if a state sandwiched between the 2 wanted to become an independent state, it really has to work very hard. Because naturally, something it is getting out from India, something it is getting out from Pakistan, some natural resources, some national highways. So practically, they have two options: join India or join Pakistan. Now, the problem with Kashmir was it was ruled by a Hindu ruler, and its people were predominantly Muslims. So first, the ruler, in 1947, he made a standstill agreement. And that standstill agreement demands that I want to remain independent. No poking your nose into my affairs. But at the time of this agreement, resentment started among the masses. They revolted against their king, the Hindu king. And covertly, it was supported by the Pakistan army. Pakistan army, although nascent at that time, there were British officers who were not ready to indulge their nose into Kashmir. But junior commissioned officers, they organized groups and sent these organized groups into Kashmir, so that they took arms with the local population and revolt against this Hindu Raja. So after this, in 1947, in the same year, the king of Kashmir made an instrument of accession. Instrument of accession means he gave his consent. Okay, I want to join India. And the timings of this is still disputed in the United Nations Security Council. Either he did it or he did not do it, or what was the time. Practically, war started between India and Pakistan very early, when both states got independence. So we are just diverging on some historical facts, because with this historical perspective in mind, then we will relate it to the theoretical part. So after this war, Kashmir was now sandwiched into Indian-held Kashmir. The major part was with India, and the most important was the Valley of Kashmir. It is held by India, and 1/3 of it came to Pakistan, and later on, out of that 1/3, 1/10 was given to China after the India and Pakistan did some border demarcations. But the problematic part and the most prized part lies with India. So this was the historical context. We will relate to it, what happened after 1947 later on. Now let's see the theoretical part. Let's see how this dispute is entered into Pakistani or Indian bones. So there are constructive narratives on Kashmir. Constructive narratives means if one has a copy of a textbook which is being taught to a Pakistani child in Pakistani school, it starts with Kashmir or Kashmir is ours. It is the jugular vein of Pakistan. It's the inalienable part of Pakistan, inalienable part of Pakistan. Pakistan is not complete without Kashmir. We will take back our Kashmir from India. Another constructive narrative on compulsory textbook on the Indian side. Let's see. It starts with Kashmir is the jewel of Indian secularism. India is a secular state, so-called secular state. It says we accommodate all communities, all faith. Pakistan is an aberration of history. Pakistan is the mistake of Britishers. One day, the day will come, Pakistan will come back to India. So Kashmir is the jewel of Indian secularism. So this is a constructive narrative on the Indian side. And mind you, these textbooks are ingrained into the minds of all Indian and Pakistani students from the age of 5 till university, because history textbooks are compulsory, and in all universities one has to read them, one has to get passing marks. So it is indoctrination at the state level. We'll come back to it later. The fourth problem. Now the fourth problem is the problem of biased literature. For every Indian, Pakistan is a mistake. Kashmir should be there as a jewel of its secularism. And for Pakistanis, Pakistan's own identity being Muslims is incomplete without Kashmir predominantly Muslim. So there was a problem of biased literature. How can one find an objective analysis of this dispute? So for my own research, I focused on what do the Kashmiris say about their dispute. Forget about India and Pakistan. Let's come up with a Kashmiri perspective. And I was really stunned, shocked to see that there is an indigenous Kashmiri discourse on their identity too, which so far is hidden. Nobody talks about it. Why? Because Kashmir is not a sovereign state. So why to talk about identities of local Kashmiris? Talk about from the perspective of Indians and Pakistanis. So this hidden discourse of Kashmiri identity, when I went through the books, what the Kashmiri authors have wrote on their land, it was totally in contrast to what Indians and Pakistanis both are saying. So that we will see subsequently. So let's discuss more of the theory part, the most stronger part. So the traditional IR theories, they talk about security dilemma, and security dilemma you already know, if state A increases its security, it ultimately cripples the security of state B. And if state B want to do something not related to state A, it will again make state A insecure. So if two people are enemy of each other, they one want to do something for his own security's sake, not for state A. State A becomes threatened. So this is a classical security dilemma which I hope you all know in realism, as you know the theories of IR. But if you still don't know, it simply means if you are an enemy of someone and that someone do something for its own security's sake, you become threatened. So there is a vicious cycle. For example, the classical security dilemma is USA and USSR. Both are enemies. If one test fire a nuclear missile, the other gets threatened. Immediately, security specialists or NASA researchers were called upon, and another novel thing is done. And overall, the whole security is lost. It becomes problematic for the whole world. So this security dilemma, this Kashmir issue has been studied as a security dilemma. If India do something on Kashmir, Pakistan gets threatened. And then there is a vicious cycle. Pakistan do something on Kashmir, India gets threatened. And another perspective is neoliberal institutionalism. And that perspective calls, okay, let's make strong institutions. Make strong institutions to lower this security dilemma. Bring USSR and USA to talk. Bring Taliban's or radicalists to a Doha initiative in Qatar. Let's ask them why they are fighting about, what they are fighting for. So this another perspective, another theory of IR, it says, it accepts that there is anarchy in the world, there is a problem of peace, and that peace can be brought through institutions. Make strong institutions. These strong institutions will then automatically lower the disorder in this world. And the third perspective on which I focused upon is a social constructivist perspective. And this perspective calls for everything, every relation, every behavior is socially constructed. It is me and you who make our relationship. Canada also have nuclear weapons. Why America is not threatened with Canada? Why it is only threatened with former USSR? It is because of the relationship, the context of this relationship, that sometimes there is anarchy, sometimes there is cooperation. It depends how you see me and how I see you. So it is something in our brain. We socially construct this environment. The issues of gender, this feminism, whatever is at stake, is all socially constructed. Nothing is given. For liberalists and for neorealists, everything is given. In the sense, there is anarchy. There is disorder in this world. It will remain there. Why? Because man is selfish. Everybody has his vested interest. These selfishness cannot be curbed into cooperation. So there will remain anarchy in this world, no matter what you do. Both agree. The other thing on which both agree is states are selfish. Why should I talk about that? For Pakistani perspective, Americans use Pakistan and then throw them out like a tissue paper when they were fighting a communist war. Am I insane? Don't I know that states are selfish? Am I sleeping at that time? I don't know Pakistani interest. Where were all the billions of dollars of US aid gone? America gave Pakistan a lot of aid. Why don't I use it for the prosperity of my own country? And now I'm talking about that America used us like tissue paper and throw us out. So for realist and neoliberal institutionalism, states are selfish. States are selfish. There will be anarchy in this world. There cannot be peace. It is this third perspective which is a glimmer of hope. Social constructivism, it says me and you. We all socially construct this environment. The moment we changed our behavior, the moment we change to see things in a different perspective, we can bring peace. And the classical example is the end of Cold War. For realism and neoliberal institutionalism, there can never be a peaceful end to Cold War. But we all see Cold War ended globally, at least peacefully, in the sense that not a missile is fired directed towards United States by the Russians. So these theories failed to predict a peaceful end to the Cold War.